All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at osmosis. Now, remember, one of the things that all cells have to have in order to survive is a plasma membrane. And one of the jobs of the plasma membrane is to allow things to go in and out of the cell. So we talked a little bit about active transport and passive transport and how the cell wants to be lazy. So active transport is when the cell has to use basically doors to let things in or out. And passive transport is when the cell can just kind of sit back and doesn't have to do any work at all. So I always compare it to a screened-in porch. So some things are small enough to get through the holes of the screened-in porch. So you sitting there on your porch enjoying the day, you don't have to do anything. You know, if an ant crawls in, it can turn around and crawl right back out. Or the wind is blowing, and so it's cooling you off. You're not having to do anything. But with active transport, you have to literally get up and go open the screened-in door, so that uses energy. So we talked about how the cell really likes to try to use passive transport when it can. It's like you riding your bike downhill. You don't have to pedal. You don't have to do any work, but you're still moving something. Something's getting to one place or the next. So when we talk about the plasma membrane, we do have to talk about different types of solutions and these things called osmosis and diffusion. And these are ways that the plasma membrane can move things in or out. So that's the bell. So when we talk about things moving, we talk about like stuff, like sugars or proteins or nucleic acids, waste products. So when we're moving like solid particles or just like what I call diffusion equals dots, stuff that's in the water, this is movement from particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So it's like things want to spread out. So if you're jam-packed into an elevator, all that's going through your head is get me out, get me out, get me out. So as soon as those elevator doors open, you're going to spread out. And all particles are the same way. So if there's a whole bunch of stuff inside the cell, it's going to try to leave the cell. And the cell doesn't have to do anything at all. It's just like everything is crowded inside this room, and so things are just going to try to leave. And that's what we call diffusion. And so diffusion is how things like sugars and starches and proteins, if they're small enough, they can go back and forth whenever they want to. So diffusion is kind of what we call I call it the movement of dots. So if you see a picture and it's got a bunch of dots in it, the dots are the stuff. That's what's actually going to be moving. And the cell does not have to do any energy with this at all. Again, it would be like you having to move a bunch of stuff. So you have a house that's on a hill and you're moving down the hill. Instead of you carrying the boxes, you basically pack your stuff into tubes and just let them roll down. So that would be diffusion. This is how cells can move things in or out without having to do any work. And this is caused by something called the concentration gradient. The way that I talk about it is think of it as a current. So you're on a river, and this current can carry stuff for you. It'll let you, move boxes on things with boats. And in your cell, you always have a current. So if you think of diffusion as being this thing called a concentration gradient, basically the easiest way to remember is things are always moving. So what you have in this picture is an example of a concentration gradient. There's more of something on one side than on the next. And I'm not looking at the balls, I'm looking at the colors. So notice there's a lot of purple balls on one side, and they're just on that side, and then there's yellow balls on the other side. Well, the red balls are going to want to get away from each other, and the yellow balls are going to want to get away from each other. So this creates a concentration gradient. This creates a situation where things are always, always, always going to move. Because what's going to happen is the red dots are going to try to move from left to right in order to spread out, and the yellow dots are going to try to move from right to left in order to spread out. And that creates a current. So as long as you can use that current with your concentration gradient, it should allow you to move things. And so, like you can see in this picture, the red balls spread out, the yellow balls spread out, and so they try to reach what we call dynamic equilibrium. So notice I have 5 red balls on one side, I have 5 red balls on the other side. I have 2 yellow balls on one side, 3 yellow balls on one side, 3 yellow balls on the other side. That's equilibrium. Everything equals. But it's called dynamic because it's always moving. It's going to try to reach equilibrium, but because we have a current and the current doesn't stop, It might be equal for just like a split second, but then things move again. And so this is what creates what's called a concentration gradient. That's a current. So just like, if you owned a shipping company, you would want your main office to be upstream because you could put things on a boat and just let the current carry them down. You wouldn't have to, the boat wouldn't even have to turn on. So it's saving you gas while you're earning money. You don't like having to take things upstream because then you have to use your engine. That's going to use gasoline. You're going to lose money that way. So your cell really tries to use the current when it's moving things. So when we're moving stuff, this is what we call diffusion. So I just always remember dots equal diffusion. So if I'm looking at the dots and I want to know where the dots are moving, that's the stuff. That's going to be what we call diffusion. Now that's different from osmosis. By definition, osmosis is the diffusion of water. Now, remember, I try to think of corny things. Alphabetical order. Diffusion comes before osmosis. So nature will try diffusion first. It's going to try to move the dots first. It's going to try to move the stuff where it needs to go. But sometimes that doesn't work. If that doesn't work, nature will try osmosis. So that's what I mean here when I say it happens when solute particles cannot pass through a membrane. So notice here in this example, we've got stuff. We've got the red dots. There's more red dots on the right side than on the left side. So nature wants to spread the red dots out. However, notice the little dotted line there in the middle. That's my screen door. These dots are a lot bigger than the holes in the screen. So the dots can't move, but nature wants to spread them out. So it tried diffusion first. The dots can't spread out. So what it's going to do now is it's going to move water. So water is small enough to move through that opening. So notice water goes from the left side to the right side to help push the red balls apart. Because remember, nature wants to spread things out. So nature will try diffusion first. And if diffusion doesn't work, nature will then move to osmosis. Both of these, something is moving. Diffusion, nature will try first. Diffusion is going to move dots. Diffusion is going to move stuff. If that doesn't work, osmosis happens second. Nature's going to use water to basically spray things away. Think of it that way. Which leads us to three types of solutions. We have what we call hypertonic solution, hypotonic solution, and isotonic solution. In the case of hypertonic, you're going to see this causes cells to shrink. In the case of hypotonic, the cell's going to get really big. It's going to cause the cell to swell. And then in an isotonic solution, the cell stays the same. So in this picture, you can see arrows. Okay. Hypertonic, water is going to come out, so the cell is going to shrink. Hypotonic, water will rush in, so the cell will swell. Hypo, the cell grows, it gets bigger. And isotonic, the cell is going to stay the same. So this is how all this works. So in the case of hypotonic solution, hypotonic, the cells swell. That's what you need to know. Hypo grows. Hypotonic, the cell is going to swell. So direction of water, it's going to go inside of the cell. Right. So hypotonic solutions, the cell is going to grow, the cell is going to swell, and direction of water inside. Right. The cell, water will rush into the cell, and the cell is going to swell. Now, as animal cells, we hate this. We hate it. We don't have a cell wall, so we're like a water balloon. As the water rushes in, our cells get bigger, 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 and so they're going to pop. So as humans, this is why we can't drink water too fast. Okay? Like people who have been in the desert or are really, really, really thirsty, they say don't drink it too fast, it'll make you sick in your stomach. Your body will make you throw it back up because your body knows if you drink it too fast, your cells will absorb it too fast, and then the cells will explode, and you can actually die from that. So this is why we have to be real careful with how much water we drink at one time. We can't drink it too fast, or we can actually cause our cells to explode and pop. So as animal cells, we don't like a lot of water really, really, really fast, fresh water really fast, because it causes our cells to explode. Now, the opposite of that is plant cells. Okay? Plant cells love hypotonic solutions. Plant cells love to be swollen because this is how they stand up. Okay? So the water will rush into the cell and cause it to swell. So it's going to press up against the cell wall like you can see here. So it's like a water balloon that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it can't pop. And that's what gives the plant strength. So this is what we call turgor pressure. This allows the cell to swell, and so the cell stands up. So it's just like one of those like flimsy water, like balloon men you see at like used car lots or shopping centers. It fills up with air, so it stands up. Plants want hypotonic solutions. Animal cells don't. In the case of an animal cell, a hypotonic solution is going to cause the animal cell to pop. Plants love hypotonic solutions. This is why you just keep watering your plant, because you want the cells to swell. Because if they don't have enough water, they'll shrink back down to normal size, and that's when they wilt. They're not dead, they're just wilted, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. In the case of hypertonic solution, hyper means more. So with hypertonic solutions, there's more stuff than water. And in a hypertonic solution, this would be like salt water. There's more salt outside of the cell than inside the cell. So that's going to cause our cells to basically let water out to try to wash the salt away. This is why we can't drink salt water. Hypertonic solutions cause the cells to shrink. Water comes outside of the cell. So with hypertonic, there's more stuff that we have to wash away. That's why it's hyper. There's more stuff. So the cell's going to shrink. And in that case, obviously that's going to kill the cell. So we can't drink salt water because salt dehydrates things. You guys saw that with, seeds. But the water leaves the cell and the cell shrivels up. All cells hate this. This is why we can't drink salt water. It kills our cells. Plant cells hate it because salt will still kill it. And this is what we call plasmolysis. This isn't shrinking. This is the cell actually dying. So you can see here, the first one is what the plant cell should look like. Those arrows represent pressure. So in a plant cell, it should be swollen. So the water should be pressing up against the cell wall so it can be strong and it can stand up. But when we put plants in salt water, this is why, you can't give salt water to a plant. It causes the inside of the cell to shrivel up and die. And so no cells like to be in a hypertonic solution. Okay? No cells like this at all. Okay? When you have more salt on the outside of the cell than inside the cell, that's going to cause the cell to shrink. The next one is isotonic. The root word iso means the same. So isotonic is basically where you are at homeostasis. So you have the same amount of stuff on the inside that you have on the outside. So, for example, if I'm 80-20 on the inside, I'm also 80-20 on the outside. Which, if you'll let me go back for a second. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. All right, let me go back to this. With hypotonic solution, there's more stuff on the outside than on the inside. Okay. Or there's a lot of water on the outside of the cell, so the water's going to rush into the cell. So let's say the cell was 80-20, which means 80% water, 20% other stuff. Outside would be like 95-5. So there's less stuff on the outside, so water's going to rush in. Okay. With hypertonic, hyper means more. So there's more stuff on the outside. So let's say the cell again was 80-20, 80% water and 20% stuff. Outside might be 60-40. So there's less water on the outside, but there's more stuff. So water is going to rush out of the cell. And in the case of isotonic, they're equal. Iso meaning equal. So if there's 80% water inside the cell, there's also 80% water outside the cell. So nothing really happens. Some water will go in, but some water will come out as well. And this is what animal cells really want. Our animal cells want to be isotonic. Whatever amount of water is inside the cell, they want the same amount of water on the outside of the cell. However, with plants don't really like this because this can cause plants to wilt. But this here is just a real picture of blood cells and what will happen. So in the case of blood cells like to be in isotonic solution. So the amount of water in them equals the amount of water outside of them. You can see here in a hypotonic solution, the cell's going to swell. It's going to grow. Hypo, it will grow. And in the case of a hypertonic solution, the cell's going to shrink. That's in the case of animal cells. Okay? But notice here with plant cells, in an isotonic solution, plant cells actually kind of shrink a little bit. This causes them to wilt. In a hypotonic solution, they will swell. That's what they really want. That gives them their strength. But notice in both of them, in a hypertonic solution, they're going to shrink. That's going to kill the cell. That's why we can't water things with salt. And that's why we can't drink salt water. So, in the case of a hypotonic solution, hypo means low. So there's less stuff in the solution than in the cell. So like I said, in a hypotonic solution, let's say the cell is always 80-20. 80% water, 20% stuff. Well, if I were to take this and put it in distilled water, pure water, which is 100% water, no stuff, water will rush into the cell. So in the animal cell, it's probably going to swell up and it's probably going to explode. Plant cells, this is what plant cells want. They want to be in hypotonic solutions. They want you to water them all the time because that creates turgor pressure. It's like having the water balloon is so swollen, it's tough, it's strong. That's how plants stand up. That's what gives them their strength. Hyper means there's more stuff. So again, if my cell's 80-20, outside would be 60-40. This would be like me dropping your cell in salt water. Water's going to leave your cell to try to wash the salt away, so your cell's going to shrivel up. And in both cases, for both plants and animals, they will shrivel up. Plasmolysis means the cell shrivels in plant cells, and it's going to kill the cells. Isotonic is where everything's equal. So this would be like me taking a cell that's 80% water, 20% stuff, and put it in a glass that's 80% water, 20% stuff. So there's really no net movement. Now, that means water moves in and water moves out, but it's about equal. So in animal cells, we stay our normal shape. That's what animal cells want. But in the case of plant cells, they'll shrink a little bit. And the cells are limp. They're still perfectly fine, they're still working, but they don't have that strength there anymore. So that's what causes your cells to wilt.